Hi, my name is Sterling, and today's topic will be on why Puerto Rico should become a state. So, Teddy Roosevelt fought in the Spanish-American Civil War in 1898, and that is when we gained Puerto Rico as a territory. And since then, it has stayed as a territory. And while we have granted inhabitants on the islands citizenship, we have given them very little else. I have been researching this topic for several years because I've always been puzzled as to why Puerto Rico hasn't been a state, even though we've had it as a territory for 130 years, and yet another island like Hawaii, which is comparative in language, difference of culture with mainland America, became a state, and Puerto Rico did not. So my first three topics will be that Puerto Rico has the size and the population necessary to become a state, that the Puerto Ricans themselves want to become a state, and that they desperately need to become a state. So first, population and size. How many of you can point out Puerto Rico on a map? Some of us? Yeah, Puerto Rico is pretty forgotten, I would say. It's southeast of Florida. It's a small island, and well, you may think it's very small. It's almost 3 times the size of Rhode Island, according to the CIA, which I thought was an interesting fact because it proves that it's not going to be the smallest state. And then I thought it didn't, when I first researched this, I thought it didn't have a lot of population, but if it were to become a state, it would be ranked 31st in population, which means it has larger population than 20 states, including Mississippi, and Alabama, which are pretty well-known states. This is a population density map of Puerto Rico, and as you can see, some parts of Puerto Rico are very dense. Considering it's an island with 3 million people, I would say that's very important. Just the amount of people on that island that do not get the same rights as people on the continental United States was something that intrigued me when I started researching this topic. And then Puerto Ricans, which I think is the most important, they do want statehood, because if we were to give them statehood without them wanting it, that would be weird. So in 2020, during the election cycle, they held a poll asking, would you prefer statehood or not? And the majority of people, 52.5% of the time, voted yes for statehood. And the turnout was 55%, which sounds low, but that was in line with the governor race in Puerto Rico at the time. So 55% is a pretty normal turnout at that point. And then actually the leading party in Puerto Rico is the party that is trying to advocate for statehood, and they're leading in like the government because the people want statehood. So that just proves that they want statehood. And then the final thing is that Puerto Ricans suffer every single day. How many of you have been without power before? Most of us? When Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico, people were without power for 6 months. When I used to live in New Jersey, and Hurricane Sandy hit New York, and I was without power for 3 weeks, and that felt unfathomably long. I could not imagine 6 months in tropical climates like Puerto Rico without air conditioning. That would be horrible. We just hit this weekend, I think we hit 98? We all thought that was hot, I would presume. Now imagine like 110 on an island for 6 months without power, because they do not get federal funding that a state would for natural disasters. When Texas, their infrastructure went out, their power went back on within 2 weeks because they got billions in emergency funding from the government. If Puerto Rico were to become a state, it would get at least $10 billion a year from the federal government for funds generally. That means infrastructure, healthcare, Social Security. And currently, Puerto Ricans are unable to vote in general elections. They have reduced Social Security benefits, and their minimum wage is less than ours currently, according to PuertoRico.org, I think. So like, it's not even Puerto Ricans themselves. If you were to move to Puerto Rico, you would lose your right to vote, simply because you live in Puerto Rico. You as a citizen don't have the right to vote. You have the right to vote because you live in a state, not because you're a citizen. Because Puerto Ricans are citizens that aren't allowed to vote. If they move to the US, they can vote. But as long as they're in Puerto Rico, they're not allowed to vote, even though they do pay taxes, which brings up the point of taxation with representation. So Puerto Rico every single year suffers due to hurricanes, mismanagement, corruption, because they don't receive federal funding and federal oversight that a state would. Any questions? No? So in conclusion, Puerto Rico has the size and population to become a state. They want to become a state, and they need to become a state due to mainly hurricanes just devastating. This was from Hurricane Maria. Entire cities were destroyed, leveled, because they're not given the infrastructure funding needed to build hurricane-proof housing. So in conclusion, they want it, they need it, and they can be it. It's just the current U.S. Congress and Senate stops any bill that comes to them about mandating a plebiscite, which is a vote. So anytime a vote gets to the Senate about whether Puerto Rico should be a state, it dies in the Senate due to stalling filibusters. And I feel like we need to change that. So just keep in mind, anytime you go to vote, just remember, people in Puerto Rico can't. Thank you.